So I call this meeting to order. We got the cameras gone? Okay. So welcome to meeting number 117 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Before we begin, I'm not going to read this, we read it just a few minutes ago. Use the black headsets and keep them away from the mics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members. Wait until I recognize you, please, by name before speaking. For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The committee clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Another item of business is that when we have people speaking online, the sound in this room is not very good, apparently, because of feedback issues. So we're recommending that when someone online is speaking, to use your headset, and you should be able to hear them well. So pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted on August 13, the committee is meeting to study the review of the foiled terrorism plot in Toronto and of the security screening process for permanent residents and citizen applications. So I want to remind members that there is currently a Section 517 publication ban in place. A Section 517 publication ban prohibits the publication of any information, evidence, or representations made at or in anticipation of a bail hearing. Any bail conditions, reason of the bail court, and any evidence or materials relied upon at the bail hearing are prohibited from disclosure. I asked the House of Commons Legal Counsel to give us some advice on this as well. And I can't find a note, but apparently if documents that we receive in the meeting, during the meeting, and we exchange amongst ourselves during the meeting are covered by privilege. Here we go. While this ban has no impact on proceedings based on the privilege of freedom of speech, nonetheless, members should, out of respect for the judiciary, exercise great caution and do not refer to any of the facts relating to the bail hearing for the individuals involved in this case. Further, parliamentary privilege does not provide protection for statements that are made outside of the official parliamentary proceedings. Members should be mindful of this when making any comments publicly to the media or when using social media. We also note the application of the Sub Judice Convention, which suggests that members should refrain from discussing matters that are currently before the courts. Members should exercise caution and not refer unduly or unnecessarily to matters that are before the courts. Anyway, I think we're all kind of aware of this, but it never hurts to be more aware. So I'd like now to welcome the witnesses. From the Canadian Border Services Agency, we have Aaron McCrory, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement. With Canadian Security Intelligence Service, we have Vanessa Lloyd, Interim Director. From the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, we have Pemi Gill, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Aisha Zafar, Assistant Deputy Minister, Migration Integrity. And with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Senator Gates Flaherty, Director General, Canadian Criminal Real-Time Identification Services. So we'll go straight away into questions. I propose also to break this at halfway through, so we have like a 5-minute break, and we will start a new round of questions after that. So we'll start with the 6-minute round. We'll start with Ms. Landsman.
Thanks for joining us. I'm gonna go back to what we were talking about when the minister was here. And while we appreciate the work and speed at which agencies acted when they had the information, I can understand why people would say that that's how the system works. What we haven't got to the bottom of here today is our concern about why you didn't have the information after this individual had been in this country for 6 years. And from the chronology that you provided this committee right before it started, had 6 different incidents of security checks. I'm going to ask you, whether it's Mr. McCrory or Ms. Lloyd, how can Canadians be sure that there are the proper checks in the system to make sure that this didn't happen before, that there aren't terrorists in our midst, and that this won't happen again? You can appreciate that Canadians want the answer to that question.
Mr. Chair, I can start, and then Vanessa, if you want to join in. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I'd like to describe is, in fact, I think we have a very robust system in place when it comes to security screening. You've heard a little bit in the previous session. It starts with the assessment that is done by our colleagues in the IRCC, and then based on risk indicators, comprehensive files are referred to the CBSA and CSIS to do comprehensive security screening. And we can describe in more detail what is entailed in that, but I'd say from a CBSA point of view, it's about understanding the person who's in front of us, reviewing the information that we have, understanding their travel history, their work history, where they're coming from, and then doing in-depth analysis both in terms of open source research, but also running names and information aliases against a range of our intelligence and enforcement databases. If necessary, then we also dig into further getting information from domestic as well as international partners. And then we provide a recommendation to our IRCC in terms of, but sorry.
Yeah, that has all been covered. I
Right.
just want you to appreciate that that this individual who is allegedly on an ISIS video from 2015 that was publicly available has been in this country for 6 years before the RCMP thwarted a terrorist plot that would have killed people in the GTA, somewhere in Toronto, presumably, after 6 security checks. You can appreciate why Canadians are concerned, can't you?
So again, our outcome, the goal that we're focused on is ensuring the protection of Canada and Canadians. And so when we make our decisions, when we do our analysis, it's based on the information that we have available at any given moment in time.
I think this is the most robust process that could have happened in this case. You're telling Canadians that?
I'm telling Canadians that we have a robust system in place, but as the minister indicated as well earlier, we are asking ourselves, do improvements need to be made? So we are conducting.
So there wasn't a failure in this?
I would go back to the point is that we've made the best decisions we can at those moments in time with the information that was available.
So Canadians watching this see that, again, 6 security checks, 6 years of this individual who is publicly on an ISIS videotape, who is now behind bars or being held on very serious terrorism charges. You think the system, you really believe that the system worked as it should? As the minister, he dismissed anything that was wrong with the system here today in his testimony. You really think that that's how the system should work here? You're really telling Canadians who are watching at home that the system is robust and everything worked as it should in this case?
What I'm telling Canadians is we're asking ourselves, can there be improvements made to this system? We're taking a very hard look at that. We're doing that in collaboration with our partners in CSIS, in the IRCC. We're going to do a representative sample of cases that have had positive assessments in the past and ask ourselves, have we missed anything? Are there any systemic issues, any gaps in our processes?
Anything. There's been 6 incidents of security checks here. Of course you've missed something. These guys were just arrested. A father-son duo were just arrested in a hotel room 10 minutes from the riding that I represent and within 40 minutes of the riding that committee members here represent. Of course you've missed something. Has there been any consequences for anybody who has been involved in any of these checks?
There's nothing to indicate at this moment in time that we had information available to us when we made those decisions that would...
That's a problem?
I'm saying we're asking ourselves if we need to review some of our processes and systems.
I appreciate that you're asking yourself these questions, but don't you think it's a problem that you didn't know that this guy was awarded a visa here 6 years ago after being in an ISIS video from 2015 that is publicly available and was arrested with his son days before committing a terrorist attack?
I'm apologizing, and I just have to repeat that, in fact, we made the best decisions that we could at that moment in time based on the information that we had. I think we have robust systems in place, but we are asking ourselves, can we do more? And we're looking backwards to see if, in fact, we need to do more.
I don't think there's a single Canadian watching today that would agree that you have robust systems in place if this is what happened. I don't think there's a single Canadian today watching saying, you know what, the system worked exactly as it should. What happened? Where were the failures? Why did this government fail?
I'm not sure there are any failures. Again, we are going to do a respective view and to see if there's more, if we missed anything, and if there is, we will make corrections. We have 183 staff at CBSA that every day are conducting security screening. About 206,000 per year we get coming our way, and we issued about I want to say 130 decisions last year. So.
Guy who slipped through the cracks. Can you assure Canadians that there hasn't been any more? That there aren't terrorists in our midst, that this won't happen in the future? I appreciate that you think that this is a robust system that worked exactly as it should, but I think people watching this would disagree with you.
What I would assure Canadians is that we have multiple lines of defense in place. So if we don't capture them at the stage of security screening, we also look at people coming to the country. And as you heard from earlier testimony, about 7,500 people were no boarded prior to even departing for Canada. About, I want to say about 37,000 people were turned away from Canada upon entry. And then we have an additional line of defense in terms of our inland investigations. So last year we launched 88,000 inland investigations based on concerns about inadmissibility. When we find inadmissibility, we take those cases to the Immigration Refugee Board, who's a decision maker. Last year we removed 15,000 people, of which about 800 were serious inadmissibilities. So there's multiple lines of defense that are in place. We don't rely on a single point of failure. We have multiple lines of defense, and we're asking ourselves, do improvements need to be made? And that's, I think, a powerful message for Canadians is we do want to know if improvements can be made, and if there can be, we will make improvements.
Thank you, Ms. Landsman. We go now to Mr. Gahir. Mr. Gahir, go ahead, 6 minutes, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. So I wanted to touch on the line of questioning that Ms. Landsman was asking. We in Canada obviously have tens and hundreds of thousands of people that seek to get a visitor visa to come to Canada, and their security screening processes to make sure that the wrong individuals don't get access to Canada. Obviously, in this case, someone did arrive in Canada and then filed an asylum claim. Is it theoretically even possible to search every single video or to conduct a global facial recognition search on every video for the individuals that are applying for visitor visas to Canada? And do we even have the resources to scour the dark web for every single individual that applies for a visitor visa to Canada? Is that even possible, theoretically?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I can start off by talking about how we initially screen temporary resident applicants, so those coming in to visit Canada. Every application for an individual who wants to come to Canada as a visitor is screened by the IRCC with that initial security screening. And so we look at biometrics. Biometrics helps us not only to identify whether or not there's any criminality that is known, but it also helps us to, in terms of identity management. This is the first time that we're seeing an individual, and we anchor that identity for the individual throughout the entire process. Our officers are highly trained in different risk indicators. These risk indicators are created collaboratively with our partners at the CBSA and at CSIS. Those risk indicators are clues for the officers when they're going through an application on where there might be some type of elevated risk or where there might be an opening
so
to...
Just to interrupt, once we've reached that elevated level of risk, for that pool of people, is it possible then to conduct a dark web search or a facial recognition search for all the content on the internet in the world for those individuals? I don't think that's theoretically even possible, no?
My colleagues at CBSA or CSIS who would then at that point conduct a comprehensive security screening if we referred the application. Vanessa, did you want to?
Certainly. Perhaps I can jump in, Mr. Chair. So I will refer to the members of the committee to the information put before them in terms of the range of other tools that are available in each and every case. And so upon referral where we do have indications of a possible national security concern, a risk indicator, doesn't mean that there is information present at that time. We can apply a range of tools. And you'll see in the material that we put to the committee that can include, as we discussed this morning, checks with international partners, reviews of open sources and other tools. I will refrain from getting into the specifics of our capabilities as it relates to the members' specific question in terms of technical technical capabilities and methodologies. But what I can say in answer to part of the concern I'm hearing from the committee is that while I said this morning there is an increasing and intensifying risk as it relates to violent extremism, the members should be assured, and Canadians should be assured, that there is a very small number of people who are present in Canada who are willing to mobilize to violence.
So I still want to focus on the question regarding scouring the dark web. Should our law enforcement be scouring the dark web when it comes to conducting routine security screens, assessments?
I would say from a CBSA point of view, and Ted Gallivan alluded to this earlier, we are asking ourselves, do we need to do more in that particular space? So as part of the review, we're asking ourselves, what's the feasibility of that? What would it take from a technology point of view? And what would be the usability of the information that we'd get from that and the feasibility of us finding it? It is a daunting challenge, but we are asking ourselves that question.
Okay. Chair, how much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. So I wanted to ask a question about the difference between an individual that has gotten a visitor visa, that lands in Canada, let's say at Pearson Airport, which is in my riding, and that files for asylum at that airport, which is an inland claim, versus an individual that makes a claim prior to entering to Canada. Because can anyone on the panel speak to the different legal protections that are afforded to those two individuals, or maybe how different the processes are for those two streams?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I can say is that, as you mentioned, every individual who is in Canada who claims asylum is subject to 100% security screening by our partners at the CBSA and CSIS. So that comprehensive security screening is conducted on every asylum claimant in Canada. With individuals who are looking to seek asylum, coming into Canada from outside, they are assessed differently. I don't have all of the details, as I'm more on the migration integrity side. They are assessed to determine whether or not they could become permanent residents in Canada, and then they would go through, if it's approved, a permanent resident screening process.
Could we have a submission to the committee, I don't know if that's possible, of the difference in the security screening procedures for an overseas application that's seeking asylum versus an inland application seeking asylum?
We can certainly look into that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gahir. On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
Now to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, go ahead, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be for Mr. McCrory. In his testimony, Mr. McCrory told us that the system is working well as it exists and that there was no failure. So I understand that, in quotes, it's normal or common for individuals like these two to obtain the right to be in Canada, obtain Canadian citizenship and all of that. I find that concerning. I sincerely believed, and I don't think I was the only one, I sincerely believed that there had been major mistakes, gaps in the system, but we're being told that there weren't. I thought there was a problem with funding. We're told it's not the case. I'd like to know, in Mr. McCrory's opinion, is this normal? What should we expect in Canada? How many individuals does he think there are like these two who are preparing terrorist attacks?
Merci pour le question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
I want to reiterate that, in fact, we are concerned that these two individuals got through. And that is why, in fact, we are launching a collaborative review of our processes with our partners in the IRCC and CSIS to understand what happened and what, if anything, we could do differently. What I would say is at the moment in time that the security screening partners reviewed these files, we made decisions based on a very robust process based on the best information we had available at that time. When new information becomes available, for example, when somebody is in the country, There are different steps that can be taken. I won't comment on what the CSIS and RCMP may do in the criminal world, but from from a CBSA point of view, if we have information regarding somebody's inadmissibility in the country, we will launch an inland investigation. As I noted, we're doing about 8,000 of those this year. Those inland investigations will assess should this person be in the country. If not, we take that file, that evidence, to the Immigration and Refugee Board, who will make a decision about whether or not that person should be removed from the country.
Monsieur McCrory.
Mr. McCrory, I understand that once individuals are here, there are different procedures that are in place. But is there not a way to prevent them from coming here? Because if we bring people in who are terrorists, who have intentions to perpetrate terrorist attacks, in my view, I thought those individuals didn't even come to Canada. Now if we're being told that we let them in and once they're here, investigations, more robust investigations are done. Well, I find that concerning, don't you?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
What I'm trying to describe, in fact, is the multiple layers of the defense that are in place. And I think the member's question is absolutely right in terms of our first objective is to push the border out as far as possible. And that's, in fact, why we have a security screening process in place that starts with our colleagues in the IRCC, that results in comprehensive security screening being done by CSIS and the CBSA. So in 2023, we did 74,000 reviews. We had 74,000 files come our way, of which we closed 38,000 in terms of people seeking to come to the country. That's the first line of defense. First IRCC, then our security review, comprehensive security review. If somebody is on a plane or in a flight manifest on their way to the country, CBSA has additional defenses or tools that we bring to bear, other lines of defense. So we have our National Targeting Center that reviews all passenger manifests for people seeking to come to the country, and we have international liaison officers who are working overseas. They work with airlines and with local authorities to deny boarding to those people who we deem to be inadmissible, about 7,500 of them in 2023. Next line of defense is at the port of entry. We have highly trained and experienced border services officers.
Monsieur McCrory, je m'excuse.
Mr. McCrory, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't want to be impolite, but I only have 6 minutes to ask questions. I understand from your answer, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you've done everything you could do with the tools you had, you and your colleagues. But you also added earlier.
We will improve it. Avez-vous des suggestions?
Do you have suggestions? What can be done? I understand the 38,000 cases, but what can be done to improve the screening process to prevent this from happening again, in your opinion?
It's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. It is a great question. We're asking ourselves this right now. I don't have any immediate views in terms of what changes, if any, that we need to make, but I am working with my colleagues who are at the table with me today so that we can understand what happened and, again, if necessary, make any changes that we need to. The system is always going to be...
Manifestement,
Clearly, there are other states, Mr. McCrory, with all due respect, there are other states that act and react more quickly than we do. We've seen that we were informed by a foreign country about this individual, the crimes that had been committed elsewhere. So there are other states that manage, and with all due respect, I think everyone is competent and serious in your services, but there are people who obtain better results. So you have certain expertise in this area. Do you not have an idea, before conducting studies that will take 2 or 3 years, do we not have an idea of what we could do this week, now, to improve our screening system to prevent similar cases?
First of all, I want to assure the member that this is not going to be a review that's going to take a couple of years. The minister was very clear in his direction to us that he's looking for results and information as soon as possible. So we'll be in the coming months coming back to the minister with our recommendations and our understanding of what happened. I think the challenge that we're always going to be facing is we make decisions based on the information that was available at a given moment in time. Can we do a better job of collectively gathering some of that information? I don't know. We need to determine that. But if we don't have information, we can't make a contrary decision about somebody. That's the fundamental issue. And I'll just say, for example, we've talked about the video. To CBSA's knowledge, and it's only to CBSA's knowledge, the one version that we've been able to identify has only been available for 2 years. That's when that information was available globally and was only available to us in the last couple of weeks. We can only use the information that we have to make decisions.
Merci, Monsieur. Merci.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think, the witnesses would probably agree with me that concerns with individuals who are attempting to come to Canada is not just with the potential of they themselves committing an act of terror or some kind of injustice on Canadian soil, but also the potential of some whose words may inspire or incite violence here in Canada. And, I do want to note that this can happen with individuals regardless of their political ideology or their religious background. We can see that covering the entire spectrum. I've been on this committee long enough to have seen that. But I will point out one example that did make the news recently, and this is just a few weeks old. It's concerning the case of Mr. Mohammed Hoblos, who was scheduled to come to British Columbia to speak at Thompson Rivers University earlier this month. He has been registered in the European Union on the Schengen Information System. So he's been barred from entering Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands, and I believe he was also detained and deported from Switzerland. So I just want to use his as an example because there may be others. And I wanted to point out those countries because, of course, Germany, Norway, Netherlands, and Switzerland are strong Western democracies. They share the same values as Canada does, and I'm sure have very similar outlooks as the Canadian government. So I guess in comparison with other countries which are very much aligned with Canada's approach on the world stage and share our values, what can we learn from other countries which may have decided to bar certain individuals? And are there instances where other instances where those individuals have been admitted to Canada? I'd just like to hear from some of the people who are with us today, your views on how Canada judges that information and why at times we may find ourselves at odds with some of our closest allies and partners who share our strong democratic values.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In terms of when an individual is inadmissible to Canada, it's based on the legislation. So the Immigration Refugee Protection Act clearly outlines the reasons why an individual would be inadmissible. Using the example that you provided, you mentioned something similar to hate speech, Mr. Chair. So under the security inadmissibility in IRPA, there are various reasons why an individual could be inadmissible. Those include things like engaging in terrorism, being a danger to the security of Canada. Our officers must be able to meet the threshold of a reasonable grounds to believe that an individual is inadmissible based on the requirements of the legislation. When it comes to what information other countries have available to them, that is relevant to their own inadmissibility requirements in those countries, which may be different than our legislation. However, we do have opportunity to review that if an individual has been convicted outside of Canada of an offence that if in Canada would constitute an indictable offence under an act of Parliament, or two offences not arising out of a single occurrence, then that person would be deemed inadmissible. So our officers would then work with our national security and law enforcement partners, as well as our council, to ensure that we could meet the reasonable grounds to believe that that is an equivalent offence in Canada and therefore deem them inadmissible.
Thank you for that answer. And perhaps my next question would be to CSIS. There's not much Canada can do with individuals who become radicalized abroad. I mean, if we become aware of it, there's something we can do in preventing them from coming to Canada. But of course, gathering that kind of intelligence can sometimes be a very difficult task. I was wondering, are you able to speak to what kind of de-radicalization efforts the government of Canada is doing here on Canadian soil, so that we can prevent our own permanent residents who are here already, our own citizens, from following a pretty dark path and potentially committing a crime. Can you speak to any of the efforts or the kinds of resources that are being put into that kind of work?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Apologies, member, that is in fact an area that is outside of my expertise, and I'm unable to give you that information.
Do any of the witnesses have anything they can add on that? Okay, let's see. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, for the next questioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll start our second round of questions with Mr. Motz. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. You know, one of the things that I've sat through the first hour or first 2 hours this morning and listened carefully, and I'm still concerned as Canadians are, is, you know, how did this happen? And the confidence they need to ensure that it doesn't keep happening. We haven't had that yet today. And I appreciate the fact that our national security apparatus acted responsibly and efficiently to thwart the attack, and that's kudos to them. However, there was a failure that occurred. We need to ensure that that failure doesn't keep happening. Now, Mr. McCormick, CBSA has a critical role and responsibility in the process to protect Canadian citizens from those coming into Canada with dangerous or divisive ideologies, and who pose a threat to our national security and public safety, and to not allow them entry. And you have, you know, you've talked about multiple ways that you do that. Now, what's interesting that I found is I go through the timeline that we were given just before the meeting today about the various times that the accused in this matter, senior, was refused as a non-genuine, visitor. He then received a temporary resident visa. He was refused again, or not refused. He was given it. He was then assessed and found that a risk indicator, and that happened over and over and over again. These risk indicators. That's when CBSA is supposed to step in and take over. Now, what checks did you actually conduct to make that happen? Do you have access to the database that Mr. My NDP colleague talks about, the Shagan database? Did you run this individual through the FBI database? What actually are you through the Homeland Security database? Did you run them through anything that would give rise? Obviously, someone who is in an office who's interviewing this individual had concerns. They identified a risk. That same risk appeared again months later. It again appeared again years later. Yet this person was able to get temporary status, permanent status, and then become a Canadian citizen, all while these risks were being presented. How can we sit here today and ensure the Canadian public that we know that there's a problem, but we don't know, obviously this timeline even identifies the problem, and yet he was still able to be here. And I'm actually quite concerned about what that actually means. You also indicated that you mentioned before in testimony previously that CBSA has a role to play in removing people ordered removed from this country. Of those people that were ordered removed, how many actually remain at large? Do you know the answer to that?
Well, I think of the ones that were removed, they were removed. There's about
there's thousands that are ordered removed.
Right.
Some of them are ordered removed based on the risk to Canada.
I apologize. I don't have, through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize. I don't have our kind of removal stats immediately at hand, but I think you're absolutely right in the sense that last year we actually did remove 15,000 people, but there are, for example, about, in public reported data, it's about 30,000 people who are on we're trying to track down, for example.
Right. And those many of those you can't find, right?
Correct.
So it's reasonable to presume, based on how this individual gained access to this country and received citizenship, that some of those also have got into this country, illegitimately. Now, one of the concerns that I wonder about is, as you navigate, and Miss the lady from Miss Safar from immigration as well. You guys have a joint role to play, and really, you guys do the interviews, and you guys are the first matter of defense before it gets into CSIS if there's an issue. What do you do, and how do you check to make sure that, obviously, people lie to you all the time? And I'm sure is that what happened here? And what steps are being taken by both CBSA and immigration and refugees to make sure that you can see through the lies that obviously this person told? Because people come to Canada for legitimate reasons and for illegitimate reasons, for nefarious reasons. So what are you doing to ensure that those who lie to you are caught and not allowed in?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I would like to start by saying the vast majority of those individuals who visit Canada, of which we had over 7 million applications we processed last year, the vast majority of them are truthful, genuine visitors to Canada. We at the IRCC are responsible to determine not only admissibility, but also eligibility. So I would like to clarify the two, Mr. Chair. The eligibility is really around, are you eligible under the conditions set out in the Act? So are you coming to be what you say you're coming to be? If you're applying as a visitor, do you intend to stay temporarily?
So with that in
Mr.
mind,
Motz, Mr. Motz, you're done. But I'm just giving her time to answer your question.
okay, thank you. Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the eligibility would include whether or not you are a genuine visitor. So that's separate from the admissibility when we would start to screen where we do the security screening and then perhaps refer to our partners for a comprehensive security screening. Our applications set out a number of different questions where we do rely on the information that's provided by the applicants. However, the applications ask for a number of different details for the individuals to provide, and those details are then assessed against the risk indicator packages, which again are clues to the officer where we might need to do a little bit more of a comprehensive digging. We also submit biometrics, not only to the RCMP, but we have information sharing agreements with our Five Eyes partners. So we are able to check with them if there is any known derogatory information on the individual who is applying to enter Canada. The risk indicators as well, I would like to point that the risk indicators are based on the serious inadmissibilities in the legislation. So it's not only on security grounds, which would include espionage, terrorism, danger to Canada. It could be for human rights or international violation, human rights or international rights violations. It could be for serious organized crime as well. So all of those different indicators are part of our risk indicator packages. And my colleague at the CBSA.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very quickly.
It's those risk indicators that are developed by CBSA and CSIS and that we provide training to IRCC officers on that tell it this is a file that you should look at. It's not a definitive statement there is a risk. It is a question. It prompts the question that leads to the comprehensive security screening that we do in partnership, not instead of but we do in partnership with organizations like CSIS.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Ms. Zahid. Go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Ms. Zafar or Ms. Gill, whoever so can answer. I know that all TRV applications, all permanent resident, temporary foreign workers, students are screened and you have a process at IRCC. What collaboration and at what stage do you do with the agencies like CSIS, CBSA, and RCMP? Are all the applications referred to these agencies, or it is like a portion of the applications if there are any concerns from your initial stage? So, and if you can also provide some details like last year, how many cases you referred to them?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So absolutely, all temporary resident applicants to Canada, so that includes visitors, those coming on student permits and work permits, are screened by IRCC in that initial stage for security and other reasons. We will look at the application. The officers have to be fully convinced that the individual is not inadmissible to Canada. So there may be some back and forth with the individual collecting further information. As it was mentioned earlier, our officers can also interview the individual to collect the information. If there are any concerns that remain outstanding or risk indicators, our officers will then refer that for a more comprehensive security screening to the CBSA and CSIS. When a recommendation is returned from the CBSA, our officer will take into consideration that recommendation. We also are subject to the rules of procedural fairness. So if an officer with a non-favorable recommendation from our security screening partners has further questions, they will provide a procedural fairness letter or some opportunity for the applicant to address those concerns in order to fully satisfy the officer that the individual is not inadmissible to Canada before rendering a final decision. My colleagues at the CBSA or CSIS may wish to talk more about the comprehensive security screening process.
Would you like to add something to that?
What I would add in terms of when the file comes to us, we do, as suggested, we do, as part of our comprehensive security process, we, in addition to kind of understanding who the applicant is and their travel history, their work history, who they are, and does their story make sense, we review their name against all of our internal intelligence and enforcement databases. We also have access, thinking of some previous questions, we also have information and sharing agreements with our Five Eye partners and are able to make requests for information to partners around the world in order to gather information about people. Some of the systems, and I can't talk about the specific systems we have, again, because we don't want to give those adversaries information about what we do and how we do it, but I can assure members of the committee that we do have access to information from international partners.
My next question is that in regards to the citizenship, like, can you explain to this committee more about the process of revocation and the thresholds that must be met to, in case if you have to revoke citizenship for anyone?
Thank you for the question. There is, under the Citizenship Act of Canada, provisions that allow for the revocation of someone who has been granted citizenship. And under that, the Minister of IRCC may seek a declaration from the federal court that the person obtained citizenship by false representation or fraud or knowingly concealing material circumstances. So the process for that is such that IRCC does an initial assessment as to whether or not there is sufficient evidence and information to proceed with starting the revocation process. The client is notified, the individual is notified that there is some information and we're assessing. They're given 30 days from a procedural fairness perspective to provide any additional information they'd like to do so, at which time the IRCC, on behalf of the minister, advises the client that we are pursuing and moving forward with a revocation procedure. Depending on the circumstances under which of those three areas or the combination, the false representation or fraud or knowingly concealing material circumstances, we would then proceed with a submission to the federal court, who would be the decision maker in terms of the revocation, although the client always has the choice to request that the Minister of IRCC be the decision maker.
Do you have time? 20 seconds. I'll give. Thank you.
Thank you. On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
Now, Mr. Fortin, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be to the representatives of the Department of Immigration. Ms. Zafar, we know that the son who arrived came from the United States, whereas the father, we don't know where he came from. He came in 2018 at Lester B. Pearson. Do you know where he was coming from?
Merci pour la question, Mr.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
At this time, due to the ongoing criminal proceedings, I am unable to provide any further details on the father.
OK. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un d'autre parmi les témoins?
Okay, could another one of the witnesses, does another witness know where the father came from and is able to tell me?
Personne ne sait.
No one knows? I'll get back to the son, Ms. Zafar.
Point of order.
Oui.
Mr. Gerritsen on point of order.
Just to clarify, it was said that no one knows, but can we just understand if no one knows or if no one can provide the information? Because I think it's very important.
C'est impossible de savoir. Mais je ne veux pas perdre mon temps. Vous avez arrêté mon temps?
Have you stopped my time, Mr. Chair?
Time. Could we just clarify that question?
For the clarification, and it is correct to say that, as Ms. Zafar mentioned, we are unable to comment on that detail due to the ongoing proceedings.
Very well, thank you. Allez-y encore, Monsieur Fortin.
Go ahead, Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll continue with Ms. Zafar. In the case of the son, it's indicated in the chronology that he came from the United States. He was born in Egypt, Egyptian citizenship, but he came from the United States. He entered under a refugee claim in February 2020. Why did he not return to the United States under the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
At a port of entry, which is managed by CBSA, he made an inland claim. I can't speak about his details in particular, but if somebody arrives at a land port of entry and makes an inland immigration or refugee claim, we assess them against the Safe Third Country Agreement, the STCA. And there are a number of exemptions that apply to the STCA, including that if you have an anchor family member here, so if somebody
What is the exception that was involved in his case? Because in principle, he should have been returned automatically. So what exception applied here for the son?
I can't talk about this specific case, but what I can say that if you have family members in the country, that is one of the exemptions that are at play with the STCA.
Even if the family member is a terrorist?
The STCA says if you have an anchor, for example, if you have a family member who's in the country, you're exempt from the STCA.
Merci, Monsieur.
Yes, but this person. Thank you. Sorry.
See. Mr. McGregor, please, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This committee has been told several times today that when actionable intelligence became available, all of the Canadian security agencies took action. And we can see from the timeline that it was in June of 2024 that CSIS became aware of the potential national security threat posed by the subject, who is an Egyptian national. I guess, there have been a number of questions today about, how we gather intelligence and how it's acted upon and how it's shared. And I know specifics can't be shared, but when it comes to an organization like ISIS, whose main theater of operations is in parts of the Middle East, which have for at least a decade or more suffered through war and all kinds of strife, I'm just wondering if CSIS could just inform the committee and maybe Canadians generally just what the challenges are in gathering intelligence in areas like that, just the kinds of challenges, whether it's from human-sourced intelligence, open-source intelligence, when you are operating in a theater that has experienced war for so long and may have crumbling infrastructure, little to no government records. Can you just talk a little bit about the challenges of what it's like to operate in that kind of an environment?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Honourable Member. I'm unable to go into the details of our specific operational activities either in Canada or abroad. What I can tell you is that the member is correct in that conflicts that are occurring abroad can have the potential to cross into our borders. And that can be from a range of threats, whether it be ideologically motivated, politically motivated, or religiously motivated. And I would again like to reassure the committee that, as stated earlier in our testimony, CSIS and our partner national security agencies have the resources and capabilities to address all threats as soon as we become aware of them, regardless of their provenance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll go now to Mr. Motz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to my previous line of questioning about the honesty or lack thereof of the senior suspect in this particular conversation. Do you believe it's likely in this case that he misrepresented himself on the files, and do you believe he lied? And I'll ask both Mr. Cormier and Mr. Zafar.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Due to the ongoing criminal proceedings, I cannot provide any further details on the...
Well, that's not a question about the ongoing investigation. This is a question about his immigration status and how he got here. So obviously he came in under false pretense. I mean, if what you're telling Canadians is that the systems that you have in place work, and they work fine, then you would have been able to identify some affiliation somewhere. And because you didn't, that would, give me rise to believe that either, the checks weren't done appropriately or properly, or somebody misrepresented themselves, and which is not new to either one of you and your departments. And I'm just wondering whether, if that's the case, and Mr. Cormier or Mick Cormier, I would ask you that same question.
The question, Mr. Chair, and I'm under the same restrictions in terms of what I can comment about in these particular cases.
Well, we can draw conclusions based on both of your, what you can and can't say, and I appreciate that. Ms. Safar, you had mentioned something, and I think, Mr. McCarty, you did the same thing about you follow the requirements of the legislation, for admissibility, admittance, etc. Do you not think that Canadians have a right to believe and a right to expect that we must always err on the side of caution, that we must always be on the side of national security and public safety when we allow individuals in that we may not have all the answers to?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Our officers make every effort to satisfy themselves that an individual is not inadmissible to Canada. Working with our partners, they will do a thorough review based on the information that is available to them and to our partners at the time to make that determination. My colleague might have something that he wants to add from the CBSA.
I would, again, just echo the point in which that our staff undertake these thorough reviews. The criticism that we get as an agency is not that we're not doing thorough reviews. Typically, the criticism is we're taking too long because we take the time necessary to do the most thorough review that we can based on the best available information at any moment in time. And it's based on that information that we provide a recommendation to our colleagues in IRCC.
So as you look at the current structure we have in place now to ensure that individuals do not enter the country in the manner in which this individual did, is there legislative things that we need to look at that need to be fixed? Is there something, some ideology, some position of this current government on lax immigration standards that impact this, in your opinions? Mr. McCorry?
What I would say, and again, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I would say again is that is one of the reasons we are doing this review, to understand what happened in this particular case. Are there systemic issues? What solutions are required? They may be procedural fixes on our part. They may be allocation of resources. It may be, as I've suggested for CBSA, we need to do more on the dark web. And it may be legislative or regulatory changes. It's premature for me to speculate as to what they are, but that's certainly on our agenda in terms of what we need to look at.
Ms. Landsman asked you a question earlier about, and I believe you answered affirmatively. I'm sure everybody, as witnesses today, understand what Canadians expect. Like, you want them, you understand their concern, I take it. Is that a yes?
Yes.
So then it's obvious then that they need answers, and not just, and not just for this committee's sake, but for the sake of our national security and public safety moving forward. Because if one individual got in this way, I'll guarantee you that there are others here already, and we already know that based on 700 IRGC individuals who are already in this country. How they got here, it begs another question: how did we let those people in, who already have affiliations to an organization that's a terrorist organization? So when you do this deep dive as to where the gaps were, I think you need to go beyond this case and look at all cases for both immigration and the CBSA on how we can fix this broken system, because it is broken.
In fact, and what we want to do, to your point, we want to make sure that we do the level of analysis and the level of thinking about this that Canadians expect of us. So I don't want to give you an off-the-cuff answer in terms of what we need to do, and looking at the system as a whole. And it's not just looking at these two cases. As the Minister and Mr. Gallivan indicated, we'll be looking at a representative sample of all the cases that we've processed over a period of time to understand if there's any gaps there, and again, what improvements, if any, we need to make.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Mr. Moff. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question with regard to the dark web. several times today, the Conservative Party has talked about videos being readily available, publicly available. And I recognize you can't talk about information in this case. But there was research that was done that says key characteristics, and I'm quoting, key characteristics of the dark web include the inability to search or list them through legal platforms, passwords to gain entry when accessible, and hidden identities of users, network traffic, IP addresses, and data exchange through them. While the dark web was originally built for military communication and advocating freedom of speech, it has also provided technology enablement and power to adversaries to masquerade heinous activities. So I'm not being flippant here at all, but perhaps, Ms. Lloyd, this could be directed to you. How do you access the dark web?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Member, I'm not able to answer that question without revealing the details of our operational tradecraft methodologies and capabilities.
As an individual, is it easy for me to Google darkweb.com and be able to access information that's on there? And I'm not trying to be flippant, but it has been portrayed here today that it's easy to access. You can't tell us how to access it because it's in the national security interest not to share that information. So is it easy for me to access the dark web?
Mr. Chair, Honourable Member, I think what I can say is that we've spoken a bit this morning about the complexities of living in a digital age, and that would be reflected in some of the conversation we've had today about the challenges of being able to access information at the time that information is perhaps needed with regards to decisions that have to be made or files that need to be reviewed.
Thank you. The other question I had is it was alleged that Canada didn't do as well as other countries in terms of security checks on these individuals. However, the minister, when he appeared, talked about an exchange he had with the UK and how grateful the UK was about the information that was provided by Canada. I think it would be fair to say that the sharing of information actually allows us to broaden the net to make Canada safer. So it's not necessarily that one country is doing better than another. It's that we have a network, particularly the Five Eyes, but other networks where we can share information. And it's not that Canada's doing a bad job. It's that we have a network to make Canada actually safer. It's perhaps I'll direct that to CBSA.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As a key element of our security screening program is our ability to gather, first and foremost, we look at our own data sources, but we also do rely on partners both domestically as well as internationally, and especially in the Five Eyes, but not just exclusively. So it is a two-way street, and we share information with them, and they share information with us, and it is a tremendous, there's a great deal of utility in that in terms of how we do our work.
And that sharing is ongoing too. It's something that's happening all the time between the security agencies, correct?
That is correct.
And I think it was just said that our system is broken. I would actually argue that it's not broken, and what happened in this particular case actually shows that it's not broken. That the work that all of your agencies do, and I commend all of you, actually worked, and as a result, Canadians are safer because of that. And I think it's important not to be fear-mongering here and making Canadians start to fear their neighbors, which is the sense that I'm getting from the questions. I think it's important that Canadians know that the agencies that we entrust with our national security are actually doing the work that we entrust with them and are doing it well and keeping us safe. So, Chair, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moff. So that wraps up round two. I'm going to suggest to the committee if we want to take a 5-minute break and start again after the break with another round one. Is the committee okay with that? So let's make it 5 minutes, not 10 or 15, okay? Suspended. So I call this meeting back to order. So we'll start a new round of questions with a 6-minute round with Mr. Brock. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start with refuting what I believe to be a false narrative at this committee. And I've listened very carefully to my Liberal colleagues. I've listened to some of the commentary from these witnesses. And I guess to a Canadian observer who is not entirely familiar with the circumstances that surrounded the creation of this particular meeting, one would think that all is well in Canada, that everything is working as it's intended to work. CSIS is working appropriately, that the CBSA is working appropriately, law enforcement's working appropriately, and the government is doing its job. Well, that can't be furthest from the truth. The number one responsibility of Justin Trudeau and his government, number one responsibility of the CBSA and CSIS, is to keep Canadians safe. Not some of the time, all of the time. And what has happened here is we were within a hair's breadth, minutes, hours, potentially days away of a mass casualty on the Toronto Jewish community. So clearly this wasn't hatched overnight by the two accused. They were probably planning for days, weeks, months, all under the radar of CSIS, all under the radar of immigration, all under the radar of CBSA, all under the radar of our law enforcement. So I've got one phrase to say to this committee, to this committee and to Canadians. Thank God for France. Thank God for French intelligence that gave CSIS the tip. This wasn't a national in France who was planning something against Canadians. This was an individual that we granted Canadian citizenship to that completely fell under the radar map until a tip went to CSIS. And then CSIS got the RCMP involved, and we stopped what could have been a significant mass casualty event. And I'm sorry to all the witnesses, you failed in your responsibilities to keep us safe. You didn't do your job. There, but the grace of God and good French intelligence, they are behind bars where they should be. Now, I listened very carefully to Mr. McCrory's words. We have a robust, we have a thorough system. Our reviews of citizens or of individuals coming into our country, it takes time. You talked about what Canadians expect. Well, sir, I can tell you that I've got reports from news media that strongly suggests that the two accused in custody is by no means a one-off. In fact, I'm going to read from this report. This is from the National Post from a few weeks ago. American authorities recently announced the apprehension of 233 terrorist suspects seeking entry from Canada into the United States. Were you aware of that, CSIS?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm not familiar with the direct reference that you
Sure.
may be alleging to in the media.
How about Mr. McCrory? Was CBSA aware of this?
Again, like my colleague, I'm not aware of the direct
Wow.
reference that you're speaking.
233 would-be terrorists walking the streets of Canada, all under the radar map of this Prime Minister, this government, and our professional public service and our security agency that wanted to get in the United States and wreak havoc in that country, and they were walking freely. We do, and I support my friend and colleague Mr. Motz's assessment. We have a broken system, and I hope to dear God, for the sake of the safety of Canadians, you identify very quickly and robustly where the breakdown happened and fire the individuals who didn't do their job. Now, Ms. Danmoff talks about how difficult it is to access the dark web. Well, you know what? Canadians aren't expecting Ms. Danmoff to protect us. We're expecting CSIS, law enforcement, and the government who has access to the dark web. And this should have been on your radar map, and you failed us. There again, but the grace of God and good intelligence from France. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Did anyone wish to respond? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I would like to repeat my earlier testimony that I would refute the premise that this was a failure, in that the good work of CSIS and our law enforcement partners between the time when CSIS received the information in June of 2024 and the time of the arrests on July 28th, and the fact that these individuals are in custody is a testimony to the good work and professionalism of those officers in all of our agencies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Gerritsen for 6 minutes, please.
I'm surprised that Mr. Brock is so fond of France, considering the fact that he recently went there and got immediately called back to Canada by his boss after he took 2 plane tickets, I think, to finally make it there. But nonetheless, I do want to assure that the witnesses today know that not everybody around this table, or indeed Canadians, feel the same way that Mr. Brock does. What you just saw there was his stunt for social media, which he will use later, and most likely to raise money for the Conservative Party of Canada, and it was nothing more than that. My question to you is this. All of the focus today seems to have been on the fact that individuals entered into Canada that had a plan all along. But it is, whether or not that's true or not, we will let the courts determine that and appropriately deal with it. But my question is this: is it not true that a lot of people who become radicalized, it happens to after they're already here? So you don't have to be somebody who is radicalized, enter to Canada. You can actually already be in Canada or a Canadian citizen to become radicalized. Is that true?
Mr. Chair, thank you. As I believe we mentioned earlier this morning, that the work of security services and National Security Agency is continuous. And as I mentioned earlier, again, that is with regards to threats that come from without Canada and from within.
And from within Canada. So that answers my question, because it wasn't actually that long ago, I believe it was in 2019, that in Kingston, a very similar circumstance to exactly what we're discussing here today occurred, where an individual had become radicalized and had set up a plan and to commit a terrorist act. But as a result of another informant who happened to be an FBI informant, that plot did not occur. The house that this individual had been supposedly bringing materials to prepare a bomb was located 3 blocks from the school, the elementary school that I went to when I was a child. I want to thank you for the incredible work that you do to keep us safe. We have been sitting here and subject to especially that last rant by Mr. Brock, as though you are failures. You are not failures. You are keeping Canadians safe. And what I had to listen to there moments ago, knowing what you know and knowing how you know the processes and how they work, to have sat there and just taken what he said to you shows an incredible amount of discipline, at least as from the position that I'm sitting in. And you should all be personally commended for being able to do that. Notwithstanding that, Mr. Brock tried to imply that there were many Canadians or people from Canada that the U.S. had turned away because for people that he was identifying as terrorists. Can you tell us how many people the CBSA turns away in a given year from entering into Canada?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I've noted previously, there's probably two fundamental moments in which we're turning people away. So one is prior to embarkation, where our National Targeting Center is reviewing the...
No, I understand. I'm living on time. How many people? I know the answer if you don't.
7,500 no boards in 2023, and then over 37,000 allowed to leave.
Over 37,000 people. That would be just over 100 a day. CBSA is turning away for people entering to Canada. Because Mr. Brock paints a very different picture. He paints a picture as though the border from Canada going into the United States is open and free for everyone to travel every way. You folks and the agencies that you represent and the departments that you represent do an incredible job if you're turning away 38,000 people within the last year from entering in. So notwithstanding the hyped up rhetoric and what you've had to be subject to listening to, I just want to conclude by thanking you for the incredible work that you do. We never want to see situations like this arise as to what did. We never want to allow people to enter into this country that have plans that they would like to, act in a manner as described in what's happening. But at least when somebody does slip through, you're still there because, as you said, you have multiple checks and balances and multiple layers in place to protect Canadians. And I'm not only seeing it here, but I saw it in my hometown where this happened in 2019. And because of the relationships that you have with other countries, because of the collaboration that you have with other countries, despite the politics that goes on in this room, we are safer, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Gerritsen. Does anyone wish to respond? Fair enough. On y va maintenant, Monsieur.
Now to Mr. Fortin. 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pick up on the last sentence from Mr. Gerritsen. He said, thanks to your good work, we're safer. I would agree with him. We're safer than we would be if you weren't doing good work. That being said, where I would differ in opinion with him is that I don't think the levels of security we currently have within Canadian borders are enough. I think we need to improve things. Perhaps I'm mistaken. I'm not a specialist in immigration or national security, but the situation before us today and for the next 5 meetings seems very concerning. And the fact that we can't obtain answers, and I understand very well, due to the secrecy necessary for the judicial process, I understand that, but it doesn't reassure people. And the answers we've had to date, with all due respect, do not reassure Quebecers and Canadians. The two individuals, the father and the son, were arrested. They are in custody. I don't know in what conditions they're in custody. Are we able to know, are they isolated or are they around other criminals within the walls of a penitentiary? Could somebody answer that question?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We don't have the expertise at this, as witnesses here, to be able to respond to that question.
Donc, ils sont peut-être...
So they might be in shared cells or in contact with other criminals, perhaps other terrorists. That is something that is concerning to me. I don't know if at some point we could have an answer to that, perhaps at a later meeting. What has been done with the two individuals who were arrested? That's important to me. Another thing, those individuals, the father and the son, do they have other family members here in Canada? Are there procedures or screening done with other members of their family? Is somebody able to answer that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Due to the ongoing criminal proceedings, we can't provide any more details around this case.
Ouais. C'est à se demander pourquoi les libéraux ont proposé
So I wonder why the Liberals propose these meetings. If you knew at the outset we wouldn't be able to have answers to important questions. I understand not talking about the case of the two individuals. I'm happy to look at the general process, but even when we talk about the general process, it seems a little nebulous. You say that the process is perfect, that it's working very well, that you don't need more people working with you. You don't need more in terms of budget. Everything is great. There hasn't been any failures, but everything can't be perfect. There are terrorists on our streets. Mr. Brock was talking about 233 would-be terrorists that were stopped at the United States. I had questions about that. I don't know what period that was. And were they stopped at the border? Where are they? I didn't have any answers on that. Do you have answers about that, at least? I don't think it has to do with the two individuals who were stopped.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm unfamiliar with the specific reference that the member made. However, I can speak to the fact that we, as the IRCC and with our partners at the CBSA, work very closely with our partners in the U.S. In fact, we meet every 2 weeks, so biweekly with them at senior levels to look at issues related to migration and border security at our shared border.
Madame Zafar.
Ms. Zafar, earlier, it was said that when an individual arrives at the Canadian border from a third safe country like the United States, the agreement states that they should be returned, that they shouldn't come into Canada. Am I mistaken when I say that or not? And secondly, what are the exceptions set out to let somebody come in when they come from a third party, a safe third party?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
In regards to the Safe Third Country Agreement, as my colleague mentioned, the agreement does have some limited exceptions in which if an individual were to arrive in the U.S. first and then try to claim asylum in Canada, they would be permitted to claim asylum in Canada. In the case of a family exemption, as my colleague from the CBSA did discuss earlier, family members, an individual who arrives first in the U.S. and then comes to Canada to claim asylum, if they have a family member in Canada who is a citizen, a permanent resident, a convention refugee, or in some cases, someone who has a pending refugee claim, is permitted to claim asylum in Canada. My understanding is that this allows families to be kept together when they're seeking protection. With regards to any further exemptions in the STCA, it's not my area of expertise.
Si j'ai bien compris, Madame Zafar.
If I've understood correctly, Ms. Zafar, the case before us, the son came into Canada because the father was already here. But before letting him come in, he was coming from a safe third country, and so he said it was because there was a member of his family in Canada. So would there not be an extra screening step regarding the situation of that family? With the case before us, there was somebody who committed terrorist or violence abroad. Is there not a check at that point?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. With the chronology that was provided to the committee earlier today, I can't speak to any further details about the cases. However, with the chronology, the son did come to Canada, according to the chronology, at the Fort Erie land border on February 17th, 2020. If we look at the chronology of the father, in 2020, the father was already a convention refugee in Canada. With regards to security screening in general, all in-Canada asylum claims, so this would be considered an in-Canada asylum claim because it was made at the border, are subject to 100% comprehensive security screening. What is comprised of that comprehensive security screening, I could turn to my colleague at the CBSA for further details.
Merci, Madame Zafar.
Thank you, Ms. Zafar.
One of the other documents that were shared with the committee members is a document that outlines it 8 steps. I think it's 8 steps that outlines the kind of security screening we go through. And so from a visa application point of view. In the case of asylum applicants, they get 100% comprehensive security screening, and that is done both by CBSA and CSIS. I'll talk a little bit about what CBSA does. Again, when we do that comprehensive security screening, we're trying to understand who this person is, their travel history, where they're coming from. We don't look at every file exactly the same way. We've got experts based on geography that mirrors what our colleagues in other agencies do. So they have a good understanding of where somebody's coming from, what we need to look for, where to look for it. We do open source searches on the net. We also run those names against and aliases and any other identifying information that we may have against our own internal intelligence and enforcement databases. Based on what we find there, we may go further and seek information from domestic security partners and, if need be, international security partners. In some instances, that's a fairly rapid process. In other instances, we need to do a request for information that takes some more time, but we do take the time to do it. We do a very thorough review. We're always looking to either negate concerns that might be identified or confirm them. If we reach the reasonable grounds to believe threshold, we'll provide a recommendation to our colleagues at IRCC. Actually, sorry, this is asylum. It'll go to the Immigration Refugee Board for a decision.
I'm going to have
our
to cut you
colleagues
off
in
here.
the service, the CSIS, will do a similar process.
Yeah. So thank you. Merci, Monsieur Fortin. We'll go now to Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've covered a lot of ground in today's meetings, and I don't think there are many questions left to be asked that haven't already been covered extensively by several members from different parties. But I will say this. I suppose that by virtue of the fact that we had a successful arrest and good coordination amongst our policing services, both local and RCMP, and the fact that these individuals are now behind bars and court processes and are going. I suppose by those facts, we can chalk this up to success. And I do want to echo colleagues in thanking the members of the CBSA, of the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, of the service, and of the RCMP. Many of your members work in communities like mine, and I've been at this committee long enough to sincerely appreciate the efforts that your members put into their jobs every single day. I know it can be a thankless task, and I know at times that they are very much the unsung heroes, and many times the public isn't even aware that you are doing this work, but I know enough to know that your members are working hard every day on our behalf and on hopefully on the committee's behalf. I'd like to thank them. But I would like to also, here's the little asterisk though in my statement. It is of concern that this plot was in the advanced stages that it was, and that these two suspects were in Canada in the first place. And I hope that all of our witnesses can appreciate today that Canadians are taking this seriously. This committee is taking this seriously. And so I sincerely hope that you will conduct your internal investigations with haste and with thoroughness, because we absolutely do want to make sure that a situation like this never occurs again. So I'll end there, Mr. Chair, by thanking our witnesses for being with us today. And I sincerely look forward to when we return in September, and because we will all be submitting further witnesses to continue the study, and hopefully this committee will be able to produce a good report and recommendations, not only on what the executive branch should be doing, but perhaps on what policy tools, changes we need, or changes to the legislation and whatnot. But I'll end there, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to the witnesses and to all of the members of their respective agencies for the work that they do.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. I'll also, again, offer you the opportunity to respond if you wish. Mr. McCrory.
I would just like to assure, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to assure the member that we do take this seriously, and as in terms of the review that we've talked about, it will be a thorough review. The minister's been very clear that he wants it as soon as possible, and again, if there are changes that are required, we'll make those changes.
Thank you. So that wraps up round one of this on the second hour. So I think we can go into round two, an abbreviated round two, which would probably end with Mr. McGregor. If that's okay, we'll carry on with Mr. Caputo for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for everybody being here. This is my first round with this group here. And Ms. Lloyd, thank you so much for being here the whole day. I know it's probably getting a bit tiring at this point, so we do thank you for that. And we are thankful as well about the fact that what we saw here, what's been widely reported, and what's culminated in criminal charges, we're obviously very happy that our security and law enforcement personnel foiled what would have been a catastrophic act. We're very thankful for that. At the same time, I echo what my colleague, Monsieur Fortin, said, where, I wrote down here that we've gotten the answers, but the answers don't feel all that reassuring. So I'm trying to look at this. I'm trying to take off my hat as a lawyer or even as a parliamentarian. So I try to look through the lens of my father, for instance. And so I'm looking at this through the lens of the ordinary Canadian. And, for instance, with you, Mr. McQuarrie, when you started out, you said, I'm not sure that there are any failures. And you talked about the robust process. With all due respect, I'm not sure that satisfies the average Canadian. I'm not sure that satisfies my father. So I'm going to go through each of you. Ms. Lloyd, can you see how, given what we know, this is what we know. This person came in to Canada in 2017. They were granted a permanent residency and granted citizenship in 2024, despite there being evidence online of active acts with ISIS. Can you see how the average Canadian is not comforted by this notion of reassurance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, Honourable Member, the way I will respond to your question is that I think Canadians, in fact, should be very reassured by the comments that both myself and my colleagues have made here today, in that we take our security screening responsibilities very seriously. We have intelligence professionals and officers at each of our 3 agencies that do their work on a daily basis with rigor and professionalism. They made the best decisions available to them on the information that was available to them at that time as it relates to the security screening responsibilities they had on this and any file. And most importantly,
I'm not trying to cut you off. We do have limited time. But again, I'm not asking whether Canadians should be reassured, and I'll ask Ms. Gildas. I'm not asking whether Canadians should be reassured based on what you've said. What I'm saying is, can you understand how Canadians have serious questions here, and that perhaps this is not a situation, and Canadians shouldn't necessarily, and are justified in seeing this as a situation where there were no failures. Can you see how the average Canadian would see that, Ms. Gill?
I'll defer this question to my colleague, Madame Zafar. Thank you.
Okay, Madame.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We came to the committee today and disclosed documents, which we did so with the effort and intention of being able to meet the committee's objectives of understanding the immigration security screening process and also maintaining the confidence of Canadians in the immigration security screening the immigration systems. I understand that there are still outstanding questions. However, due to the ongoing criminal proceedings and other protections that we have outlined in the chronology, we aren't able to go into further details.
And I'm not asking about that. I'm saying somebody came here in 2017. They were this close to committing a terrorist act. And will nobody on the panel acknowledge that Canadians are justified in being afraid that Canadians can still have questions, that perhaps this isn't a situation of there were no failures? Is there anybody that will acknowledge that on the panel?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The system that we have in place is an ecosystem. As the statements that were made earlier, there is no one single point in which we rely on for the safety and security of Canada. So it starts with the initial touch point that we as IRCC have with an applicant. We have the Before Canada piece. We've talked about CBSA and their ability to then use any additional information before an individual boards an aircraft. The point of entry, if there's additional information that has been received where CBSA would be able to identify those threats. And then we have the domestic network as well.
I understand the processes, and you've been through that very clearly. And that's not what I'm asking about. And for the last 4 minutes, I've been asking about how the average Canadian should see this and the lens through which they should be looking at, and whether the average Canadian, whether you can see, and with all due respect, you're here
So,
in the
Mr.
security
Caputo?
apparatus. Just one moment, please. You're here. And the average Canadian is on the ground.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure that they should be
Thank
satisfied.
you, Mr.
with this.
Caputo.
Thank you.
Any last response? No. Okay, we go now to Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to echo some of the sentiments of my colleagues in regards to the job that the witnesses do each and every day to keep Canadians safe. There's not a job out there that we can't improve, that any of us do at any point in time in our lives, and we'll continue to strive for excellence. And this is part of the process. But no one really talked about it. And I'm going to direct my questions to Miss Gates Flaherty. Can you talk a little bit about the Greater Toronto Area Integrated National Security Enforcement Team that actually made the arrests? Can you give us an overview of that team?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm here in my capacity as the Director General of the Canadian Criminal Real-Time Identification Services. So I don't have in-depth information about those teams, but certainly could come back to the committee in writing with information about the work of those groups.
Is there anyone else on the panel that can speak about the Greater Toronto Area Integrated National Security Enforcement? Oh, okay, I'll move on. So I want to be clear on something else as well. Just on the trilateral agreements with each department.
Mr. McDonald, could you maybe make sure your mic is in the right place? You're kind of coming in and out. Try that again.
How's that?
That's
that
better.
okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. I'll repeat just to be clear for clarity on the process of the trilateral. CSIS and CBSA provide security advice to IRCC. Is that correct?
That is correct.
However, CSIS and CBSA do not make decisions on applications. Is that correct as well?
That's correct.
So how does IRCC consider advice from CSIS and CBSA then when the process is completed to that point?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. When a comprehensive security screening is concluded, CBSA will provide a recommendation as well as an assessment and information for the IRCC officer to consider. That recommendation can come back as favorable, at which point it indicates to the officer that there are no further concerns from a security screening perspective. It could come back as non-favorable, which indicates that there are concerns, or it could come back as inconclusive, which could indicate to the officer that more information is required for a recommendation. Our officers will then take that into consideration, and there's a number of things that they can do with, for instance, a non-favorable recommendation. We are subject and we do abide by the rules of procedural fairness, as I mentioned earlier. So what that means is that if we have adverse information on an applicant, the officer will provide the opportunity for that applicant to address that adverse information. The information that's received back, whether it's through an interview or in writing, is then assessed again by the officer before making a final decision. In that final decision, if it is an approval, the visa will be issued. If it is a refusal, after having given the applicant the opportunity for procedural fairness, the decision maker, so the officer, will put down all of their findings and their decision in writing to indicate to the applicant the refusal.
Thank you. And so, Ms. Savar, on this process, the final say on the refugee claimants would that be the RPD?
Yes.
Who has the final say?
It would be the Refugee Protection Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, and I know it was brought up earlier on facial recognition. Is there any other countries in the world actually using facial recognition for security intelligence? Does anybody have any idea?
Mr. Chair, I would decline to comment on the capabilities and methodologies used by other countries, and would remind the committee that other countries may do so under other pieces of legislation or authorities that may or may not apply in the Canadian context.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. And further note, just on the whole process of our trilateral, is this something that's very similar in being used very similar in other countries, or can we compare?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm not familiar with the methodologies that other countries use for immigration screening at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's all for me.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, witnesses.
On y va maintenant à Monsieur Fortin.
Now we move to Mr. Fortin again. 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be for Mr. McCrory. Mr. McCrory, the targets keep increasing. We had 55,000 asylum seeker requests, and they've gone up year over year over year. 92,000 in 2024 asylum requests. The targets for 2024 have just kept on increasing. So there is more and more demand, more and more people who want to come to Canada, and more who are coming in. Do you not believe that the resources to properly screen these requests should go up in tandem?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
In fact, in 2020, from fiscal year 2023, 22-23 to 23-24, sorry, from 22-23 to 23.
Forget about the numbers, Mr. McCrory. We just have a number. So the resources go up.
Is more resources would allow us to do more, to clear more files. We take the time necessary to clear to do the thorough research in every file that we have. And so what you're seeing is an increase in our inventory. So it's and issues around our timeliness. So the issue is we're sacrificing our efficiency for our effectiveness. We're making sure that we do a good job on the files that we do review. The time and energy it takes us to do that is having impact on the number of files that we can process at any given time. And so you are seeing our inventory go up.
Est-ce que vous avez fait des demandes?
Have you requested from the Canadian government an increase in resources so you can act more quickly, so you can obtain information on asylum seekers, on immigration?
With our colleagues in agencies and departments.
Non, pas si vous coopérez.
Not do you cooperate, but have you made requests for more resources?
Yes, we work through our colleagues, for example, Immigration Refugee Citizens of Canada, as they look at refugee levels or immigration levels, for example. We collaborate with them in terms of what resources may be required.
Have you had increases in your budget over the past 2 years? And if so, what amount?
Désolé,
I'm sorry, I don't know if I'd understand.
What I was trying to say is in the last 2 fiscal years, we did see our budget in this particular area go up by about 15%. The exact.
Have you hired more people to do screening?
We use that money either to hire new employees or to pay overtime to the employees we have, or we sometimes bring in surge capacity from other parts of the agency to assist with the work.
Merci, Monsieur Fortin. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. McGregor, you have the hammer. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have any further questions for the witnesses, so I'm okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
I can take that 2 minutes and a half, Mr. Chair.
I think in fairness, we'll call this a day. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for your fortitude in bearing through us for all of these many hours and for all your great answers. And we look forward to talking with you again as we go forward. I'm sure we will have an opportunity to do so. And thank all the committee members for all of your diligence and hard work as well. And we are all engaged in this very important study. And thank you all, and we are now adjourned.